You talked about need-based economy. So just wanted to, can you throw some more light on what is your idea of need-based economy? Can you give a few examples? So how should it function?
Well, these are big questions and can't be answered in pithy statements, but nevertheless I'll try to do that. And have just one formula: simplify, simplify, simplify. That's the key. Actually introspect to see whether you really need the things that you think you need. Is high consumption, increasing of wants needlessly the way out? Is that really our measure of success and progress and happiness? Or can we be happier without so many things? These are things we need to think about. And in this connection, I'd like to refer to the question Jayesh raised a while ago, right? How much is enough? Is that it? And it's an important question, and it can be answered on various planes. And I would begin by stating what we have now is enough. As of today, here and now, let's begin with that. Not that you can't strive for more, but internally you should be satisfied that you're not dependent on what is to come further. In Karma Yoga, you act. You continue to act with integrity, with enthusiasm, but not with greed. If as a result of your honest endeavor, there is more to come, so be it. We are not against accumulating more if one knows how to use it. However, if we strive with a greed motive, with desires for more and more, that is the problem. Therefore, fundamentally, internally, if we educate people to be satisfied with what they have now in material terms, and then continue to work with integrity, and if things come along and they move along, they get more prosperity, well and good. But if they're not, if they don't, by destiny or for whatever other forces, then we should be satisfied with that. So need-based economy essentially will deal with individuals learning to simplify their modes of living.
Thank you. I think there's a question from the back of the table, and then there's next one from this table here.
My question to you, Swami, is it a virtue if a rich man does not live like a rich man, but rather lives like a poor man? If he this rich man washes his own clothes, drives his own car, is that a virtue? Or does it sound better and more spiritual if there is a redistribution of his wealth by his buying more things, spending more, having more servants, rather than, doing it himself? So I very much was impressed with the concept of trusteeship. Isn't it natural? Anything all of us have eventually is sitting in some bank account, invested in some place, delivering some goods and services through some means. How do these two things go together in the context of need-based economy versus greed-based? A rich man should be greedy. That redistributes his wealth, doesn't it?
Thank you. You've deeply thought out this question. It's a good point. Essentially, it's not so much the externals. It's the internal consciousness that drives a rich man or any man to do whatever. I mentioned in the talk, we're talking of two factors. One is ownership and the other is motive. So what is the motive? You may have somebody who distributes or redistributes his wealth in a certain way, and externally helps in another way. It's all a matter of how we approach the subject of our wealth. Do I consider myself the owner of my wealth? Do I consider myself to be the rightful enjoyer of my wealth? So if that consciousness, if that is a template for my life, then either of the two models are fine. But if that template doesn't exist, then we may have something else emerging from the picture. If a rich man wants to become famous because of his simplicity, that's also another form of the ego. Right? So therefore, all is a matter of one's internal spiritual development that will decide which is the right thing to do.
Thank you. Supriya?
Thank you very much. That was a very, very good session that you led. I wanted a question to Swamiji, following on from the panelists' questions, including Gautam. The question, it's quite a very, very optimistic scenario that there are discussions such as this, but in some ways I wonder, aren't we preaching to the converted? And there's also this question of inequality that was mentioned. It's not only in money, but it's also inequality in impoverished thought. So then what do you consider about the emotionally or the spiritually poor? And when do you really have a prognosis for this kind of discussion reaching people who have not had the privilege of thinking in this way? Because it's a pretty deep thought when you think about spirituality and you think about need-based economy, then you're talking about the divide, then you're talking about the fact that when thoughts go out, there is a sort of police force that actually gives you back the thought of karma. There is a feeling that when you don't rein in your thoughts, and I really like the concept when you mentioned going inward as a way, not just external regulation, but inward. So now we do think this way, and there is, you're coming from India where this kind of thought from years and years ago, we used to read Speaking Tree. This is something that is very much valued by all generations within India, including at even our children's level, not just, I mean, I'm very optimistic about that. But what do you do with communities who would never think of sitting, groups of people who would never think of sitting in a discussion such as this? And should you try to bring this in, or will you be just laughed off? What is the state now?
Thank you for your question. Admittedly, it is an uphill task. We are up against an upwardly mobile, aspirational world today, where people are in the acquisitive mode, where acquiring more and more is the paradigm, and we are talking of something different. So that is not a very popular idea, and there is going to be resistance to it. However, if we establish it in a sound, logical footing, people are reasonable. They will understand, and especially as they get older, as somebody mentioned in the panel, I think Mr. Sapalji was explaining, as you get older and you reflect on these things, and yes, then you come to that conclusion. In the exuberance of childhood or youth, we may be carried away with our ideas, but when the maturity dawns in, we start realizing ultimately what next? Okay, I've done it, been there, done it, now what? So again, I come back to that point of education. We have to talk about this, we have to explain things, and secondly, we have to have exemplary role models. And it begins in gatherings like this. Coming to your point about those who are deprived of this kind of understanding, what do? Well, it begins here. We all have our circle of influence, to quote Stephen Covey. We all have our circle of influence, so wherever we can spread the good word, we can be agents of change, positive change, and we can go out and spread this message, and that's how it's going to happen. Revolutions in the world, politically, have always happened by sound, by word. Whether for good or for bad, whether it was a Hitler or whether it was a Lenin or anybody else. They just spoke and spoke and spoke. And today the mass media is just about that. Everybody is doing their own propaganda. In a propaganda, I don't mean necessarily in a negative sense, but propaganda, I mean that you speak about what you believe in. So that is what is necessary for the transformation of the world and to reach out to people who may not have access to this now.
Question there, and the next question is from this table.
Thank you. Today's discussion triggered a thought in me that one difference between capitalism and spiritualism is in the chronology of events. That in capitalism, you satisfy your needs, you arrive, and then you start giving. And in spiritualism, it starts with giving. And there's a theory about when you give, the universe gives back to you. So how do we marry these two divergent elements?
Is your question that you begin with giving in spirituality?
Yes.
And
Because like fundamental nature is to give to the universe, and that's a very integral element in spirituality.
That's right.
But in capitalism, we're waiting to arrive to give, and therefore that's why the majority of the people won't ever give, because they never arrive and they die.
Yes, I think you're right. There is essentially one important difference. It's a very good point. In materialistic capitalism, for want of a better word, yes, we're thinking more of taking, and we think less of giving. In spiritualism, we think more of giving and less of taking. And in the world, we find trouble spots because people are more concerned about their rights than about their duties. So people demand things, they want things for themselves, but are not willing to correspondingly also sacrifice themselves for a larger good of others. So again, we come back to that second point, motive. So it's all a question of our motive, of our consciousness. If we're going to think about how we can serve others, how could we exist for the welfare of others? One of the foundational principles of Vedic philosophy is that we are living for others. And there are strong words used that only a miser lives for himself, exclusively, I mean. So long as you don't live for the sake of doing good to others, your life doesn't have meaning. So this is the ideology. If we have people with this kind of ideology running businesses and running our economics and being in politics and so on and so forth, the world will be so much a better place. So thank you for this good point.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
This question is for His Holiness. A great panel discussion. Thank you, everybody. I do a lot of work in corporate social responsibility, go into organizations, try to inspire people to think green, think social, and so on. I struggle with companies who are trying to do things. They're trying to become more efficient operationally. They're trying to make things more sustainable in that way, but they don't so much consider what they're making in the first place. So here you have big companies maybe making processed food, junk food, and making that look sustainable by focusing on operations. So sustainable capitalism can only work in my experience if leaders start thinking about what is it they're making in the first place. How is that impacting? Is that leading to more consumerism? Can we design products that don't end up polluting, the environment? So how do we shift the system to designing things and serving people in a way that benefits the whole community? So, and I feel that large global corporations are, yes, talking very much on sustainability, and they are doing a lot only in, they're making the wrong things more efficient rather than making the right things in the first place.
Is it for me?
Yes.
A lot of perceptive observations today, both from the panel members. Some very nice points made, and also from all of you in the audience here. I hate to sound like a broken record, but I think I come back to the same point. Because ultimately, who is the one who makes the decision? It's the individual, isn't it? It's the individual who has a certain frame of mind, a certain consciousness that's going to decide what to make, why to make, and how to make, and so on and so forth. So unless the individual is changed, unless there is an internal transformation in approach and attitude for the individual, there can be no systemic change possible. Externally, yes, we will do our best, we will have a legal framework and guidelines and so on and so forth. But that internal change is the most crucial element necessary. One corporate person was telling me that he met a marketing director, I think the Asia director or something like that, of a major consumer goods company that was marketing cereals. And this lady happened to mention to him that her goal, her company's goal, was to make Indians stop eating hot food. That was their marketing strategy. Because then, so long as you're cooking your own hot food, you don't have need for buying the things that the company produces. So now this kind of approach, you can think about, it's a topic for discussion. How ethical is it, not, and so on and so forth. It's something that's very thought-provoking, can be very insidious, it can be justified by some, and so these are all issues that come up. Because when you're driven by that one motive that I have to make profits for my company at any cost, and the more profits I make for my company, I also make those profits, and I also get a rise, and I also get my promotion because I have done this. So it all boils down again to that second point of the motive. Again, the greed-based, selfish motive. Not that we shouldn't be concerned about our own upkeep, that's normal, it's natural. But when we cross a certain line, that is when the problems come up. Did I address your question?
Maybe this particular question, perhaps I should ask one of the panel members to answer as well, since it was global companies making bad things more efficient versus making the right things to begin with. Gautam, you are on the boards of several companies, so maybe you could share a perspective as to what goes on into boards thinking along on these dimensions.
I think most companies now realize that they have a whole host of stakeholders, and and both internal as well as external stakeholders. I think companies would be very irresponsible if they don't take these onto account. I mean, in fact, the attraction of talent, it's a very unusual, it's a very lopsided world. On one hand, we are saying companies need very few people to create wealth, but they all need a certain type of people, and there's obviously the demand for these young people with talent is very high. And for companies to attract the best type of people, they also need to have values that young people, and a lot of young people these days, I mean, I guess throughout time, I mean, when you're young, you have ideals, you want to change the world, you would not join an organization which is producing food that's destroying people's health, or so that's one way of trying to get companies to do the right thing with it. And again, I think we talked a lot about change and how you can bring about change. And the tone at the top is very important. I mean, the tone at the top in terms of the C-suite and so on. How do we get these people to change their thinking? And I believe all of the things that we talked about are obviously relevant, but also at the end of the day, people and companies are a collection of people. They will change if they feel that is very important for their own survival and growth. And these days when people ask how's the economy doing, I think my answer often is it's not the economy. It's not only the economics that are going to take you to success, because increasingly now social issues are as important as economic issues because of all of the things that we are seeing in the world in terms of the results of the inequality, unemployment, and all of the things that that brings, that you need people, you need social cohesion. I mean, we see this in this country, that, you know, it's not the economics which is the important thing for Singapore's survival, it's the social framework and social cohesion, making sure that all of the you know, different groups of people that live here, handling diversity, handling the different issues, that is more important often than just economics.
Thanks. I think Jayesh has
I think the other person we're forgetting is the consumer. So if McDonald's has got to rejigger their entire product line because they realize that people are calorie conscious, or Coke and Pepsi are recognizing that the sugar content is just too high, etc. So the consumers, of course, are kings as well. Don't forget that.
Thanks. I know we are running seriously out of time, but there are lots of questions. I also know that physical food is waiting for attention while spiritual food is being ingested. But we'll continue with maybe a couple more questions. So there's one question asked for Richard.
Your Holiness, you have brought in such clarity and simplicity to a fairly complex topic. I was really I'm inspired by what you said. I don't want to sound pessimistic, but I just had this thought. You mentioned that egalitarianism is not natural. You mentioned that power corrupting is a natural phenomenon. You also mentioned that you give unbridled freedom to somebody, it's just natural that that person's, the negative aspects will overcome. So therefore, is it but natural that spirituality is not present in the world throughout? Is it also the fact that, you know, the large majority of this audience is already well experienced in life, and we now have the luxury to think about spirituality and discuss it in these ways? But earlier on, when we were just building our careers and more busy with how to, you know, get to the next level of achievement in life, these things weren't looking relevant. And therefore, is it therefore natural that the world is going through this process where spirituality will get some attention among the grey hairs, but for it to get translated into the masses is not a natural outcome?
Of course, the important thing is, in an abnormal situation, what is natural and what is unnatural may be different from what is natural in a normal situation. Spirituality is the polar opposite of materialism. So in an abnormal situation, materialism seems the normal thing to do or to be. But because the situation itself is abnormal, we need to rectify that. And what appears to be unnatural right now is actually truly natural. But because of the ambience being unnatural, it appears so. Spirituality, as I mentioned, is our fundamental intrinsic nature. That's the most natural thing. But the naturalness of it has been covered over by a very intense dose of materialism in this materialistic atmosphere. So we basically have to cleanse that external covering to reveal that inner spiritual essence that all of us embody, actually.
Thank you. We have time for just one last question. If you don't mind, sir, I'd like to pass it on to a lady there and let the lady have the last word. Yes.
At the cost of sounding like I'm asking for the clock to be turned back, the question really is to our panelists, Dave in particular, which you mentioned that you took the example of German wings and said that perhaps you're looking at drones because pilots are whatever, stressed and all of that. So really my question here is, should we not be looking at investing in our people and using technology to keep people at the core and take care of our unemployment problem? It does sound like we're asking for the clock to be turned back, because the reactions are to We have trade unions because, of all the issues. So therefore we use technology to cut out all the hassles we have with managing people.
Yeah, I think that, and I suppose it goes back to the question of motive. So businesses have this rampant profit motive. Keep more and more and more. We need more profit. We need more growth. And as they're pushed to find that, they increasingly turn toward automation, right? So in the case of Germanwings, it's being cited as the driver for that is safety for people. So you have pilots in a cockpit and they might have questionable psychological well-being or spiritual well-being, and he crashed this plane into a mountain. So in that case, it's being cited as a public safety issue. But the fact of the matter is that most businesses are driven by runaway profit motive. So when they look at this, they are being pushed by their stakeholders for more profit. And as they do that, they increasingly turn toward automation and these machines. So I think that, to me, is the issue. And your question was, shouldn't they be investing in people more? I think it's clearly they should. The question that will come up in their mind is, why? Right? And in the system, in this abnormal system, if we call it that, they, in many cases, won't have the motive to do that. And therein, to me, lies the problem. And in terms of investing in people, I read a book recently about meditation, and I've been trying meditation myself. And this book was called 10% Happier, and they're talking about many companies which are, I don't know if they were spiritual consultants or not, but they're talking about a movement where many companies are starting to bring meditation into the workplace. I think they talked about P&G. In fact, the U.S. Marine Corps has brought meditation into the military. And those are the investments in people that I think are needed or can make change, because that then seeds the internal change that will take place. And the investments there are, in dollar terms, are seemingly smaller, but the returns are greater. So I don't know if I'm answering your question. I suppose I'm trying to put myself in the mindset of the people who make these decisions and the types of changes that are needed. And perhaps there is hope. Hope springs eternal, as you said. So those are my thoughts anyway.
I just want to make one point that, companies are, after all, owned by shareholders. And shareholders are people like yourself. And at the end of the day, and shareholders are one group of stakeholders. There are a whole host of stakeholders that companies have to deal with. And in this age, with the communication, with the internet, with social media, companies are very, very tuned to answer these things in the marketplace. It becomes, they're not kind of organizations in an ivory tower who don't have to deal with all of these issues. So I think it's all of us collectively have to raise this, because, and I think, at the end of the day, if you have social tension, because of high unemployment, you have issues about, other social upheaval, then ultimately the companies cannot operate efficiently, So there's also a good economic reason for doing that. But at the end of the day, I think, as Swamiji said, it is, all of us have to be involved. It's not just in the hands of a few people. It's not in the hands of just the boards and the CEOs. I think it is all of us who have to bring about this change.
Thanks, Gautam. I know there are lots others who want to ask more questions, but unfortunately, all good things need to come to an end. And I guess there are other people who have their tight schedules would like to leave. But what I'd like to suggest is two parts to it. One is the panelists are going to be available, I hope, at lunchtime. So those of you who couldn't ask the question in a public forum, you will get the advantage of asking that in person and get more personal insights into it. And I hope, with the help of the Artha Forum guys, Rajiv, Suman, and so on, we can keep the contacts alive, and this could be a panel discussion with a difference, where it does not end with people being on stage, but the engagements continue. So that's what I'd like to propose. I'd like to thank His Holiness Satpal, Gautam, Dane, Jayesh. It has been a very engrossing panel discussion. More so, I'd like to thank the audience for posing quite a diverse range of questions, provocative at times, food for thought, all the same. So it's been contribution equally from both the sides. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. If I could kindly request you all to stay on stage for a moment, just to hand over some token of appreciation. Rajiv, could I ask you to come by and help us with that?